March of 2019, United South and Eastern Tribes held their annual Impact Week meeting in Washington, D.C. During this meeting, the USET executive officers sat down with USET's executive director to discuss important issues impacting Indian country and the 50th anniversary of USET.
Good afternoon. My name is Kitki Carroll, and I serve as the Executive Director for United South and Eastern Tribes and the United South and Eastern Tribes Sovereignty Protection Fund. We are here in Washington, D.C. this week for our annual Impact Week meeting. I am here with our Executive Board, and I'd like to start with some introductions.
My name is Chief Kirk Francis. I'm from the Penobscot Indian Nation in the state of Maine, and I'm also privileged to serve as President of the United South and Eastern Tribes.
Hello, my name is Cheryl Smith, and I'm with the Gina Band of Choctaw Indians in Louisiana.
Hello, my name is Robert McGee. I'm the Vice Chairman for the Porch Banded Creek Indians and also have the opportunity to serve as Vice Chairman of the United South and Eastern Tribes.
Hello, I'm Chief Lynn Malerba from the Mohegan Nation of Connecticut, and I am the Secretary for the United South and Eastern Tribes.
Well, welcome everybody. So we are here in Washington, D.C. this week talking about a variety of issues. For those in the audience, the Executive Board serves as the primary board of directors on a day-to-day basis for the organization. So this afternoon, we'd just like to explore a variety of issues and topics that we are addressing this week. So let's just start off by asking to all of you, when I say tribal sovereignty, what does that mean to you?
So for me, I think whenever we talk about tribal sovereignty, we have to always root that conversation right in the inherent ancient nature of that and where that comes from, the foundational principles of inherent sovereign status. And so I think for tribal people, what we're really talking about within that status is an autonomous standing to be able to determine our own future, right? So everything we fight for within Indian country and with the federal government and all of those things is all of those issues and all of those rights we're fighting for are really rooted in that one thing, is the autonomous ability to determine our own future in the best interest of our people, lands, and resources.
Well, that's interesting because when we think about sovereignty, it goes back to our relationship with the crowns of Europe, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're the tribes on the eastern region and on the eastern side of the United States. And so when the Mohegan tribe sued the colony of Connecticut in the courts of London, the courts of London found that we were a separate people, we had a separate polity, we had a separate land base, and we had a separate culture. And the goal that the way the court saw it was that we would live side by side, but neither one would unduly influence the other. And so I think when we think about sovereignty, it does go back even before the formulation of the United States.
You know, it's interesting you talk about the Crown, but I think we come from a different, from a Choctaw Nation and the Creek Nation.
We're from down south.
Down south, and just the fact that we don't have that historic relationship that exists there. But I think one of the things I've always looked at it is it's the ability to govern ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's a broad. That can be very broad. It can be, of course, with that thing, with sovereignty, it does come a lot of power in the decision making that has to be made. But I think that you said it well, both of you did, but I think it is about us, setting the path and being a part of, we are controlling our destiny. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, in your elected positions that you all hold, you are ultimately responsible for your citizenship, making sure that you have strong communities. We know there is a long history between the United States and your respective tribal nations. What are the greatest challenges that your communities are facing today?
So for Penobscot Nation in Maine, I think some of our greatest challenges are some of those that most tribes are faced with, how to overcome challenging geographical locations in terms of economic development and trying to we're dealing with unemployment rates from 20 to 40% most instances, and that's really good among tribal nations in Maine. We're dealing with everything communities are being faced with throughout the country and with opioid and substance abuse problems. So those are some of the biggest challenges we're facing is among all the other kind of run-of-the-mill, for lack of a better word, things that Indian country's dealing with. But in our first question, we talked about tribal sovereignty, and I think all tribes are struggling to get to a level they want to be at with that in their decision making. But I think in Maine, I would say one of our unique challenges is the restrictive nature of our Settlement Act and being able to reach those goals and objectives to address those disparaging issues of health care and violence against women and educational outcomes and economic opportunity. So, so that would be a unique challenge in Maine, I think, for us.
Does anybody else want to respond to that?
I could look at it, of course, the Porch Bandit Creek Indians were governed by 9 individuals, so there's probably going to be 9 different opinions on what do we feel are some of the challenges that are facing us. But I'd have to say that internally, I would think that, it's almost a cultural identity issue because of what Chief Francis was talking about, the economic development advances that a lot of the tribes have had the ability to make, and the diversification and spreading out, no longer maybe a part of that community. That when you have people that are going away or, and trying to come back or be involved and such, we are government, but we're a government that provides healthcare, education, social services, but no, we are a tribal government, and that tribal government was about having that cultural distinct identity. Mm-hmm. And I think as a lot of our younger, individuals are growing up and going off to college and getting educated, and some come back and working, I think though they're just not having that part of it with them. I think they know they want to contribute, but they want to contribute just to the government itself and not necessarily understanding the necessary history that comes with that. But from an external, I think that from an external part of the challenge is the challenges, I guess you could say, that you do face when you do have economic development and growth. That I've always thought it's like, we used to be the class system in Alabama, or just a lot of the tribes, you were here and everyone else was here. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, and with some successes, that it's flipped. And you are getting a lot of racial tensions and discrimination coming about with it. It's like, oh, look at the tribe, or look at the Indians now. And it's been a difficult one because you're dealing with people who, things have changed.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's overcoming losses as much as it is and rebuilding your government. Because if you were late to become acknowledged and re-recognized by the federal government, there was a lot that happened to you that you had no control over. Mm-hmm. And so for us, reclaiming our space, reclaiming our land, reclaiming our language was not allowed to be spoken for fear, the elders would not teach it to the younger people in the 1800s and 1900s for fear of bias and prejudice. So our language hasn't been fluently spoken in 100 years. And so reclaiming that culture and helping all the younger kids understand what that really means is important, because if you can actively practice your culture, it is very socially protective for those children. And I think we need to make sure that we do that. But also, I think reestablishing our government, because we had a government always, but we weren't able to fund it. We had to pay dues to keep our government going. And I'm sure everyone's experienced that. And so now that we have revenues, we can pay for our government, we can pay for services, we can do those things. But I agree with you, we need to make sure that we hold on to what is uniquely ours, and that is our indigeneity and our special place on this continent.
With my tribe, I would say that we need to break the circle. Diabetes is very rampant in the tribe, alcoholism, domestic violence. And I look at it, and I've seen it because I've worked for the tribe for 40 years, is we have to start at the early age and prevent diabetes. Teach the kids how to eat healthy. We just need to get ourselves together and make us healthy and break the circle that everybody is used to being okay. It's not okay anymore. So I've got some big obstacles.
So this week there are 27 tribal nations meeting here in Washington, D.C., the 27 tribal nations that make up this organization. Yes. And the reason that we are here this week is to address some of those challenges that we face beyond at the local communal level. So when you talk about sovereignty and what sovereignty means to you, and then you balance that against the challenges that you have in your community. U.S. tribe relations is very complicated and it's very complex. Many view federal Indian law as more complex than the federal tax code. So it causes lots of complications and challenges in the work that we do. What do you see as the biggest challenges, keeping in mind the work that we're here this week doing, that interfere with your ability to really do what you want to do within your communities, to exert your sovereign authorities and powers and rights?
So, I mean, to me, the biggest challenges of and you touched on it a little bit in the question, I think, is the failure to recognize the diversity in Indian country under federal Indian policy and also federal Indian law. I mean, federal Indian law is really rooted in a manifest destiny-based approach to tribal communities, and I think, you know, we hear this term all the time about, you know, separate and conquer or divide and conquer, and I think federal Indian law is very good at that, and I think federal Indian policy is very good at that in the sense that it fails to recognize. You look all over the country, you have, even in our region, you have PL 280 tribes, you have Settlement Act tribes, you have tribes that have different jurisdictional arrangements. So one of the things, though, I think the challenge is how to uniformly address these issues for everyone, right? And so, but one of the things I like about this organization is that we tend to try to focus on what everybody does have in common, even on diverse issues. So if it's taxation, the foundational approach to that is the sovereign rights of tribes not to be duly taxed, and et cetera, or to have that authority within their territory. But also core issues like land of trust. That's important to everyone, you know, protecting homelands for tribes. We talked in the previous question about cultural and value-based challenges within the communities of maybe it's just people moving back that never had the luxury of being raised tribally, and then you have a whole group of people within the community that were, and then so you have those two values clashing. Then you have economic success, and then you don't want it to become too much about that. So I think there's a lot of challenges to uniformly addressing it, but I think this organization is positioned very well with its size and its capabilities to be able to get to the foundational principles of each of these issues that are important to everyone.
I think that tribes are sometimes invisible at the federal level, and I think one of the things that's a real challenge is that there's a lack of knowledge about what the trust and treaty obligations are to tribes, and it's a constant need to re-educate at every level. So whether it's at the congressional level, whether it's at the agency level, whether it's at the bureaucratic level. For some reason, people either don't know, don't care, don't want to uphold those trust and treaty obligations, and
or just ignore it.
Or just ignore it, exactly. And so you're constantly re-educating, and some of that is political churn because there are so many people that change over time here. So I think that's a real challenge, regardless of what the issue is that we're dealing with, is how to educate people to understand that, no, they do have an obligation, and it doesn't matter if you're a congressman in New Jersey and you don't have any federally recognized tribes, that trust and treaty obligation doesn't go away. So we need to make sure we educate everyone throughout the federal system, not just talk to the people that we know and who do have federally recognized tribes within their states.
I would have just to add briefly, the only thing that we all have in common, because you mentioned the 27 nations, but we all have the trust and treaty rights that exist. Other than that, we are different. And so when you look at federal Indian law, or you know, it's like one law cannot capture the unique differences that exist. And you brought a lot of them, Kirk. The economic diversity, the languages, the cultural, the origin stories, you know, they're all different. So I think that's the confusion part of too. When you're meeting with, well, I just met with, you know, this nation and they're talking about a settlement agreement. Well, we're not a part of a settlement agreement.
Right.
So let me ask you about that then real quick. So one of the things that we recognize is, so when this organization was created in 1969. That was before the Indian Self-Determination Act. So one thing that we know to be factual for all of us is that every single federal Indian policy that existed before the current sought to do two things: to either assimilate or terminate Native peoples. So with the passage of the Indian Self-Determination Act, we've now spent the last 4 decades mastering how this town works, trying to figure out how to navigate within the waters of Washington, D.C. As best we can. But there are limitations there. So what we're finding is, speaking to the limitations here in this town, how they view us or how they don't view us causes a lot of challenges for us in the work that we do. So I'm interested in what your thoughts are and your experience as a tribal leader, what you've seen over the course of time since you've been in your positions, as you've learned more about how this town works and how to navigate this relationship, those challenges that are very real. So earlier today we were having a conversation about diplomacy, you know, the relationship between two sovereigns. that is an entirely different understanding and perspective than maybe what the past may have been. So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on what the status of that current relationship is right now, and where we kind of move forward from that reality.
You know, I may speak out of turn here. When you talked about assimilation and termination, then you went to the Indian Self-Determination Act that sounds like it fixed it. And in many ways, it did not fix it at all.
That's right.
Now what's happened is there's just new ways that people are looking at the possibility of assimilation or even termination. When you know, a lot of the discussions that we've had just regarding race, classification, and you know, what is that doing?
Right.
And we've had great representatives, congressmen. I mean, in 40 years, we've had good supporters, but they've deceased and they're not there now. So we are again having to educate new people on what is a federal tribe, what is their sovereignty. It's continual with politics up here in D.C.
And you know, we talk about champions and such. You know, have you ever noticed when you're dealing with a lot of your congressional representatives, the ones who are a part of the community, when I say that, meaning represent your community, are the ones who are truly involved or understand the impact, meaning from a cultural impact that we have on the state, from economic impact that we have on the state, just from the goods and services that we provide. So when you're dealing with other congressional members, even within your state, that, you know, and I mean, we come from a pretty large state in Louisiana and such, you know, not a clue. And do they need to care? Because it's like, well, in the end, I represent, you know, individuals up here, the tribe's not up there. And so I think that's always going to be difficult because we feel that it is their responsibility, because of being members of U.S. Congress, they need to know about the issues impacting tribal nations.
Well, to that point, I mean, if you have a relationship that's truly, the terminology they use all the time is nation to nation, trust relationship, and then you take the rhetoric and place your attention to when the rubber meets the road on those issues, right? It's like we're forced to participate in a constituent-driven business that a lot of times leaves Native people not the most powerful constituent in these issues. And so we see it in land of trust, counties getting seats at tables with tribal nations. You see it in the whole ICWA debate, right? You see a lot of, to Robbie's point, I think there's a lot of little slivers towards diminishing the rights of tribes and setting us back decades in some of these areas, rather than just saying it's like this termination policy.
Even
right?
business owners want parity.
Yeah.
Even business owners that you work with and well, we want to be able to do what the tribe does.
Right. Vice President McGee, I want you to explore that, your ISDA comment a little bit further. So I agree with you wholeheartedly in terms of, so one of the conversations that you all have had at the board table is you've recognized the value that the Indian Self-Determination Act has had, but you also recognize its limitations. And the way that you as a board have framed that in recent conversations is what's the next step post self-determination, post ISDA? Do you have any thoughts you want to explore in terms of what you think that might look like?
I think maybe we need to look at focusing on some type of legislation that actually empowers all of us again and treating us as one. When I say that, okay, you've had we all have, you talked about federal Indian law, but every law has actually a bit to do with, almost every law, you know, has a Native American section and a Native American part of it. Maybe we need to look at coming up with a whole other legislative act that encompasses all nations. It's not about one, it's not about equal housing, health care. You know what? It's one act. And we now determine what our Indian self-determination, or whatever that looks like going forward. I've talked many years ago on the conference that was held in Chicago back in the early 60s, you know, before that, the Declaration of Indian Purpose with many tribal leaders. The things that came out of that document are still relevant today that never were acted upon. And so you could probably look at all those long historical, you know, purposes, acts, and things, and we come up with a new one. Maybe that's it. Maybe we come up with our own. You know, this is not the, you know, it's Indian self that we define.
Right.
And we do have a lot, you know, some have passed on.
Yes.
But we do have a lot of individuals that don't have tribes in there, even within their states, that support us. And maybe it's one of those things we need to start reframe it. We define what this classification, there is no classification, what it is, we make that determination, get it passed, and now it's legislation.
I agree with that. And I think, so whether you call it sovereign nations, whatever it is that you call it, but if you think about setting good policy that's driven by all of the tribes in the United States, but then providing the accompanying funding for those programs, as you've heard me say a million times, you have bits and pieces of funding in every federal agency, and there's way too many funding streams for anyone to take advantage of them. For instance, in Health and Human Services, there's 554 different grant vehicles that tribes can apply to. Who can do that? So while the Office of Management and Budget says, no, we provide, is it $24 billion, $27 billion?
In healthcare.
To Indian tribes, I'm sure that funding doesn't get there. But if you funded it all through one central source, and then the tribal community themselves decided how they would spend it and what priorities they were going to spend it on, that's sovereignty and that's self-determination.
And I actually think
far too complicated.
They would like that, maybe.
Right?
Not having to worry about
Right.
a little bit over here and a little bit over there.
Exactly.
President Francis, you just made a remark about the trust relationship and the trust responsibility. A few years back, there was a presentation at the board from the current director of the National Museum of American Indians, Kevin Gover, who used to serve as the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs years ago. He wrote a legal review paper several years ago when he was talking about the trust model and framing it as an antiquated model. And one of the things that we've talked about within our USET space that led to the trust modernization effort that we are involved in organizationally is that trust relationship is based upon two things. One, that tribes are incompetent to handle their own affairs, and two, that we're eventually going away. How do you respond to that?
Well, obviously, I don't agree with that, those 2 points, but I also think, trust modernization that conversation has to get elevated. I mean, and I see it on the micro level with my own tribe, with a 45-year-old document that was created when tribes didn't have running water in Maine. And now those governments have grown to operate in my own to over 120 federal programs and pretty much provide a service in every aspect of our tribal people's life, from healthcare to law enforcement to our own court systems, public safety, etc. So I think that the trust relationship has to constantly grow with the capabilities of Indian country if that's truly going to be a partnership that is productive for everyone. So I would agree that after decades of being in this relationship in the self-determining era, that any document, there's never been a treaty in history that wasn't, in some case unwillingly by the tribes, been changed. So this idea that this system works and that it works perfectly for one side, I think most of the time, but it needs to really be looked at in a much more modern day situation.
And that was his point. That was his point to raising those two issues, that this is flawed. There's something systemically wrong with this understanding of the trust model that from that sort of view. Any others want to respond to that?
No, I just think it's time to think about how we can look at this differently because it hasn't worked. And it's really time, I think, to push our agenda forward as opposed to continue to allow the various agencies throughout the federal government impose their will on us.
Because the USET tribes are, sorry, go ahead. The USET tribes, I've always thought, we're survivors. We're resilient. And we know how to, if change needs to take place, we do our best to make that change. I mean, many of us have talked about constitutions that we've had to redraft, redone, and get passed and things because of, this is broken, it needs to be fixed. And I think that, it is time for us to come together, but do it as a nation and not just the USET, but everyone, and say, things are flawed here, but I think we can come up with better and let us determine what that sovereignty and what that destiny looks like.
And this really, just one last thing on this, I think that this relationship, in terms of the trust relationship, gets looked at oftentimes as by and large by the general public, which I think is the constituents of the people, or are the constituents of the people that we have to deal with in this relationship predominantly, as some kind of gift or special right that's being given to. I think most of America views this as a racial based relationship, right? Just based on
Incorrectly view it as,
incorrectly view it as that. But to Robbie's point about funding, I think we need to get to a foundational principle too, where it's understood that this is about a lot of blood and theft and reparations to Indian country that, you know, without being dramatic, I mean, that's what this relationship is founded on. And these are reparations. These aren't gifts and handouts to Indian country. So the ability of Indian country to use those resources in a manner that respects the diversity throughout Indian country to address the needs within their communities. I mean, I blame this opioid thing in the Northeast on two things in tribal communities. One, the, you know, kind of maintenance-based procedure we have within the IHS system that gets us to April, and we got to throw people on deferred lists, and we're better at that now at Penobscot, but we had 365 people in a community of 800 on deferred health care when we first took office. And so when you have that kind of pain management, prolonged pain management going on, and simply treating symptoms instead of the problem, it leads to some addiction. So there's one thing, but also the fact that while methamphetamines were a huge problem out west, we saw all the federal money going into methamphetamines and jails for almost a decade, while the Northeastern tribes were screaming about opioid-based problems. And that was a cookie-cutter approach that had nothing to do with us at the time. Mm-hmm. So I think, without being overly long-winded, that the understanding the diversity within tribal communities and addressing the needs there is going to be really important.
So you just made mention of something that Chief Malherbe made a mention of earlier in her remarks, but so USET did some research about a year ago about the whole fact that the wealth and the power and strength of the United States is on the backs of Indian country. Mm-hmm. So what we did in our research is we looked at the value on an annual basis of all federal land holdings and the natural resources derived from those federal land holdings. Also, we looked at the number of the annual federal budget. And then we compared that to the OMB figure, which we disagree with, but at that time it was the roughly $21.5 billion that they say is appropriated to Indian country on an annual basis. When you compare that number against either the value of the land or the natural resource or against the entire federal budget, it represents 1/10 of 1%. That's it. But yet we have to continually have this fight over and over. Mm-hmm. In the same time that we were looking and examining at that fact, we did some research on foreign aid spending and the amount of dollars that are getting pumped out on an annual basis for foreign aid spending and the reasons behind that. So the reason why I'm raising these 2 points to you is to get your perspective on, so if trust doesn't make sense, if a trust relationship is antiquated because of those 2 reasons, then it doesn't make sense in the 21st century. So then really what we're talking about is a diplomatic relationship between 2 sovereign entities. To your point, Vice President McGee, one that's not cookie cutter, one that's not based upon 573, but based upon, in your case, the Ports Barren Creek Indians and having that relationship. So explore that a little bit to me about what that diplomacy might look like. Because the reason why I raised that, one of the challenges that we ran into, if you all recall, during the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, going back several years, where the United States was the last country to sign on to that. A lot of tribal leaders at the USET board table recognized that there were some built-in limitations to our domestic advocacy, so maybe that next logical step was within the international arena. And I know, Chief Malherbe, you had some involvement in that. So that seems to be one of the next logical steps as we're continuing to build out this relationship as really rooted in diplomacy. Everybody's familiar with the relationship between the United States and Mexico, the United States and France and Canada, et cetera, but they can't speak to the relationship between the United States and Mohegan and the United States and Penobscot or Gina Band. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, one of the things that I think we need to do is change the language. When you think about tribes being called domestic dependents, mm-hmm. that's really insulting. And I think we do need to operate more as nations. And part of the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Rights or Indigenous Peoples talked about the fact that tribes should have seats at the UN, and that's our rightful place. So I think we need to continue to think about that and to try to push those boundaries a little bit and to help people think differently about us. Because if we're going to continually be viewed as domestic dependence, we're also going to be viewed as a drag on the budget. When in fact, again, 0.1% of the budget, that's ridiculous, and yet we still are so underfunded. A great statistic is that the entire Indian Health Services budget equals the budget for 200,000 homeless veterans. Now, I think homeless veterans should get wonderful care. I think all veterans should get wonderful care. But I also think that our health care should be funded equally. So we need to think about, how do we operate differently? How do we change the script? How do we change the language? And how do we advocate differently? I think one of the problems is we are, maybe 1% of the voting population. So that doesn't get us too far, does it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would agree, just to add a little bit of that, this whole terminology of dependency and discretionary and all of that is, we're fighting for long-term. All we're saying really is we need long-term strategic planning for our healthcare in our communities, mm-hmm. and we can't do that, right, without stability in funding in advance for those types of things. So to the question, I just think that you're right. I mean, the logistics may be a nightmare on something like that for the federal government, but I think a true nation-to-nation relationship is a direct negotiation between the United States and tribal nations, and quantifying the needs, the history, what the responsibility looks like, all of that, and to be crystal clear, to your point, you don't have one cookie cutter foreign policy for everybody. They understand every country that they deal with, and it should be the same here, no matter how much work that takes. And even if the funding mechanisms and all of that type of stuff takes more time, or takes time to transition under something like that, at least there's an understanding in detail what the United States' relationship has been and is. Because I bet they can't even tell you what their history is with Wabanaki people, or, we were about 400 years of getting pummeled in the Northeast when those incidents took place. So I think understanding that history, negotiating from that foundation and figuring out, but, I know realistically we've got a long way to go before we ever get to anything like that.
One of the things that you discussed earlier today, and it probably is the biggest challenge that we're experiencing in Indian country right now, is this whole constitutionality issue. And we've seen this over time continue to grow and build upon itself. So it's built to the point where we talked this morning, where we're viewing it as the perfect storm. So we have, on the administrative side, we've got challenges like the current administration's budget signing statement, where they're questioning the constitutionality of certain Native American housing programs. We've got the issue of CMS and work requirement waivers. That's on the administrative side. Then on the legislative side, we've had issues, an example of VAWA reauthorization and some constitutional challenges within that space. And then more recently in our memory is the Brackeen-ICWA decision. So you've got all three federal branches that are posing challenges to constitutionality, which is the fundamental foundation of the very diplomacy that we're talking about. So that is a very large, great concern, because from that comes everything else. And if you are able to dismantle that foundation, then we don't have these other conversations about economic development and taxes and health and all these other sorts of things. So share what thoughts or concerns you might have on this threat that we talked about earlier this morning on constitutionality.
It relates to it somewhat, but I think we've been dealing with these type of threats for many years. If you remember times, back when other legislation, we would always have difference of what a tribe meant. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like you'd have some legislation that say this is the definition of a tribe, some that would say Alaska Native, some would say Native villages. There's always been an issue when it comes to, I think, of how do they properly, and this is going to sound, categorize. When I say that, meaning we all differently, we all have different citizenship or membership requirements. And I think they're always going to have, unless we're able to come together to determine, what is the appropriate, without lack of term definition, because that's where we are defined within federal law. They're not listing each of our nations in every type of legislation. We are defined as a group.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to determine what's the best way. They cannot keep coming up with various in every legislation a different requirement on if it's even for federal funding. Quarter blood here, descendancy here. If we can't, if we can't get on the same page, I guess you could say, on what is the appropriate direction to go of who we are as a people, then how can we expect just legislators constantly, trying to define it for us? I'm not sure if that's getting to your, to your question or to your state, but I just think that, it's been under fire. Before, I think it was greater. We're talking about tribes and organizations, and some actually, I think, had settlement tribes in some of the definitions too. Then now it's just narrowing it, and it's coming up with the individuality of it from a constitutional perspective. And I don't know what the right approach is, because we're guilty of it ourselves when it comes to blood quantums, when it comes to our fifth descendancy, of putting out the various what it means to be a part of Porch Banded Creek Indians, what it means to be a part of the Gina Band, what is it to be a part of Mohegan.
Well, you're hinting to it now, but you made a direct comment about this earlier today, which is, so we have a choice right now. Either somebody is going to make that choice for us, or utilizing the motto of this organization, strength and unity, we've got to be proactive, forward thinking, and define that for ourselves before it's too late. And I think part of the question that I'm asking, though, is we are at that point right now, I believe, that Indian country needs to find a way to come together despite all of our differences and find a way to unify around what that means. So somebody else isn't defining that for us. And I think that's key to that next step that we're exploring and contemplating and thinking about.
Yeah, so I think the issue, I mean, the courts have ruled over and over, there's no more internal of a tribal matter than determining your citizenship. Mm-hmm. So it should seem to reason that once that citizenship should also be able to be serviced in a way that's also determined by the tribe. Now they question who's a citizen and who isn't, right? So those types of things. But in terms of the constitutionality issue, I mean, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with, as Congress has, not gotten perfect on these issues, but gotten better because of the hard work of a lot of smart Native people in this town over the past 3 decades. I think you're seeing institutions now get more and more standing in issues like the Indian Child Welfare Act and other places. So I think it's just this kind of sliver at a time attack. If you can take this away, take that away, next thing you know, we're under total attack on this constitutionality issue. And once they've determined that the trust relationship with tribes is race-based, I think there's a long way to go on that. But not only seeing it in those examples you mentioned, but we know of DOJ memos that are being circulated on these issues. So it is a scary time in this aspect, because I think it's meant for a broader agenda, not just these kind of siloed issues.
Well, and I think that, it's almost a modern day termination policy, because if you can continue to chip away at what it means to be an Indian tribe and what it means to be an Indian person, then there's no responsibility toward us. And that's the problem. I think that's the crux of the issue. I also think that the United States itself values individuality more than it values a communal lifestyle. And so tribes are all about their community. And so that just flies in the face of what mainstream America wants. But we're tribes, and we've existed because we have continued to be cohesive political units. And so I think we need to really work hard on, defending these issues. If you look at ICWA, why was ICWA even passed to begin with? Because we knew that if our children were being taken from us illegally. I mean, the video from Penobscot is heartbreaking. But those are our citizens, and that they're our future. And without those children, then we cease to exist. And people have lost whole generations of families because they've been adopted out. And so that's, that's just one example of how mainstream policy doesn't work for us, and we need to make sure that we protect against it.
And that's why modernization needs to take place.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're coming off Indian Adoption Act, boarding schools, we had 140 Penobscots at one time, including my grandfather in Carlisle. And so, and when they come home and tell their entire family, get a job and leave this place, there's no future in it. What did that do to tribal communities, right? That's just one example of. So I think, that you're right. I mean, I just think there needs to be a whole elevated conversation about changing the rhetoric around these issues, and I think, allowing people like the Heritage Foundation and other folks to even be able to. It seems to me very disgusting to have an organization that's not even a government be able to have standing in a federal court to take citizens away from a tribal nation. It's not the federal government doing anything. That's the whole point of self-determination in ICWA, is to protect us against those policies that might have been well intended at the time, but had
now being
devastating
used against
effects.
us.
Yeah.
Vice President McGee just made an earlier point that I think is a valid one, and just kind of combining the two thoughts that you two just offered. So there is right now an effort to narrowly define who a Native Indigenous person is, and we're seeing that. We spoke about that a lot today. So that's one aspect of it that we can try to influence, but that we don't directly control. But to the point that you were making earlier, there is a part of this that we do control, where we've allowed ourselves to adopt certain processes and policies and understandings of how we engage with our citizenship that puts that limitation on ourselves. So I think that's something that any country has to start thinking more aggressively about and thinking about more deeply, and how those two come together, this narrowing effort and then what we're doing on our own to narrowly define who we are as well. So we've talked a lot about the challenges, but one thing that we know, and you've mentioned this in some of your remarks already, is that the tribal nations in this part of the country, the geographic footprint of this organization, have had a very long history with the United States from its earliest days. A lot of the policies that we talked about earlier of assimilation and termination, this region was the testing ground for those things. But despite all of that, the tribal nations overall, not just within this region, found a way to persevere. Why do you think that is? Why have we persevered despite the greatest of odds, despite blatant federal Indian policies that sought to terminate and assimilate us?
I think, Chief Malerba touched on the just cohesiveness and togetherness of a people historically that weren't just challenged by first contact, but, these weren't easy existences before that in terms of, you can imagine being in Maine in a wigwam in the middle of February trying to figure out how to feed families and do all of those things. So I think the cohesiveness of tribes here, but in every kind of generation got left with ancestral strength and knowledge to and stayed committed to those values and to persevere. And you look at what's happening with language. I mean, that was physically and mentally just beaten out of tribal communities in the Northeast and in the Eastern tribes, all for centuries, right? And you had all of those practices, but what happened at the end of the day? You had people that hung on to those. You had people that, our stories tell us that we moved a band of people west because we could see it coming, and they came back and continued to teach this. So I think our cultures and our rightful place here and our commitment to all of that and to survival really has been it's been extraordinary. And if you look at what's happening here now, you got people sitting here in our organization right on this couch whose people probably never thought they would see another day, let alone be where they are now. Economic powers in their state, and kids going to school that have access to great health care, all of those things. It's just an amazing story, and it doesn't get told enough, I don't think.
I agree with that. And, there's such a thing as intergenerational depression, but I also think there's such a thing as intergenerational resilience. And I think that our people were so committed to one another and making sure that everyone survived. Even in my mother's day and in my mother's time, you know, she talks about some of the poverty that she experienced in Mohegan. But what did they do? They all shared their resources. They all shared their food. And so they made sure that everybody survived. And they were taught that from the generations before them. And so it's not about that individualism necessarily. It really is about caring for one another. And if we could share that message with the rest of the United States, everyone would be better off.
It was families taking care of families, and it's that strong unity of not leaving anybody behind. And just like you said, they took care of each other. Those were important things then, especially with, you know, the Choctaws being sent to Oklahoma and Indian land. And then we never made it there because we stopped in Louisiana, and it was so much like Mississippi, we just stayed there. But I can remember my grandmother telling stories about how bad things were, just like for everybody. And, you know, we fought for recognition for almost 20 years to show the federal government that we were an Indian tribe. So that was the greatest obstacle that we had, as far as I'm concerned. And at some point you get tired of trying to prove who you are, but we didn't. We just kept on because we knew who we were and that we were Choctaw Indians and our people needed things. So we fought and fought and fought, and finally we were recognized by the federal government. And then all these programs, of course, there's not much money in a lot of these programs. We never get what you need. There's always unmet needs. But the reason we survived is because their love, their care, you could just, they're cohesive, and they wouldn't leave anybody behind. So that's why we survived.
We talked a lot about kind of what led to where we all find ourselves now as Indigenous peoples and as tribal nations. But just for a moment, put aside that history as we understand it, put aside those challenges, and just imagine for a moment, if you would, that you are creating something from scratch. What would your dream vision for your people, for your nation look like for you?
I think that, you know, the Porch Bandit Creek Indians are on the right track. When I say that, meaning our nation is strong. Our nation will always have challenges. What would be ideal would be those challenges did not exist within the state of Alabama, that the state of Alabama truly recognize, even though the federal government has recognized, having the state of Alabama recognize that we are the Porch Bandit Creek Indians. And with that comes certain inherent sovereign rights and the ability for us to govern ourselves. Our self-determination lies ahead of us, and let us be the ones who take it. And you know what? We can have an amazing impact on the state if you're willing to work with us.
And I would just say, echo that. I think for us, in looking at our number one challenge in Maine, I think it would be to be in our territory and totally determining our own future. And and I think as Robbie touched on, you're seeing tribes that have more ability to do that. They're some of the most successful in this country. And I think if history's taught us anything, when others make those decisions for us, whether it's, I know what's best for your kids, I know what's best for your education, hey, we can split you all up and give you all a few acres, you know, those, we think, you know, the Dawes Act, all that stuff. None of that stuff's really worked out very well. So, so I think the ability of tribes, of our tribe, to understanding our territory, people, and resources, having the ability to make decisions over that autonomously and have that respected. You know, we all understand we're in a coexisting society. We talk about this all the time with the Penobscot River. It's like people think we're trying to take the river away from everybody. It's like we understand that's a public resource. We just want the unique and distinct people that live within it and their associated rights to be respected. And I think that's what a perfect beginning would look like for us.
The idea of the wampum belt, right? Two rivers coexisting side by side, being respectful of each other. Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's to be independently governing. But in order to be independently governing without interference from either the state, the local municipalities, or the federal government, you need to have strong economic development, because otherwise you can't support that government structure and you can't support all of the things that you need to do as a fully functional government. And so I think as we move forward, one of the things we need to do is to make sure that as we're looking at legislation, as we're looking at our interactions with the federal agencies, we need to make sure that we have good parity in laws, but in particular in the tax arena and the economic development arena, because that is where we'll be able to fully fund our governments and to really fully exercise the sovereignty that we all want.
That would be the perfect dream for every tribe to be self-sustaining and not have to depend on the government and them tell us we were going to get X amount of dollars for this, and it would just be remarkable if we could be in our world, support our people in everything that they need to do, and not have to be dependent on the federal government. And that's what we want to do.
So when you think about that next post-self-determination era, it's pretty simple when you think about it, right? It's being able to be in a place where we don't have to continually fight for scraps, that the United States honors its trust and treaty obligations at 100%. It provides those funds to all of you without reporting requirements and needing to justify those dollars, recognizing that they're paying them for a very specific reason, right? It's payment on a debt. You know, and that allows you to have those resources and then get regulations out of the way that get in the way of your economic development enterprise efforts, to get the state out of your way that causes unnecessary challenges and diverts resources out of your community that could be going to benefits for your citizens. So yeah, all of those things. I want to just pivot real quickly if I can. So again, we are here this week for the convening of the United South and Eastern Tribes, which was created back in 1969. So it's our 50-year anniversary. Things have changed over 50 years. Our members have evolved and matured and become more sophisticated and more complex over those 50 years. How do you feel the organization has done in terms of meeting the needs of its membership and also evolving to make sure that it is in a position to respond to the needs of its evolving and maturing membership?
Well, I mean, I think the organization has, I've been around this organization for almost 3 decades, and I remember a time when, and I hate to say this, but it's also my 50th anniversary this year, which is not exciting for age-wise, but I think that, you know, I've grown up with this organization. My dad was a longtime tribal leader, so I was able to see a lot of things and watch the organization very early on. And I talked about this earlier, see people like Phil Martin and Earl Barbary and Mr. Taylor at Eastern Band, and all those guys talk about, you know, transforming tribal economies and just the 1,000-foot level that conversation seemed to tribes like ours at the time, you know, and in the late 70s, coming off a century of being wards of the state, coming off, you know, extreme poverty and a whole lot of other things. But I watched the organization really just start to build its muscle over the next couple of decades, right? Initially not very strong, went through some struggles financially, went through a lot of different things. Where I see the organization now is really remarkable. I see it really as one of the strongest organizations in Indian country, and both financially and from an internal capability standpoint. And I'm just really proud to be a part of it. But I think the organization has come a long ways. Like I said, it's had its ups and downs, but I think it's continued to grow. And I think we're at, in year 50, exactly where those guys saw it back in 1969, and we should all be proud to have been part of that, I think. So I've watched, you know, a lot of things happen with the organization over the years, but I think we're right where we're supposed to be, and foundationally very strong right now.
I'm going to tell you too, I was a young girl when we were trying to get recognition, and we'd always hear about USET. You know, there's some kind of group, it's USET, but you had to be a federal tribe, and we weren't recognized yet. So to me, when we got recognition, one of the first things, of course, we wanted to do was join USET. And being down from the South and, not ever getting to go anywhere, I don't know what we thought when we got recognition. Probably that we'd get land, we'd get money, we didn't get any of those things. We just got recognized. And then, but I can say that USET is a very strong group of people who believe in the same thing. And I think if you go to Indian country anywhere and they say, well, USET, they know what USET is. We're a very strong group of tribes who are for real and who are leaders who care for their people. And so I'm just very proud that we are a member of USET. It's come a long way.
Yeah, I echo both of those. I'd have to say that it's just, I've been a part of it half of my life now. And it's no longer, it's an intertribal organization, but it is not limited to the impact it has from the United Southeastern. We're a national organization that we can effectively, have change within the U.S. We're the ones who, I think, legislators call, staff call. What's your issue on this? What's your take on this? How can you, what are your concerns? Our leadership around that table has the ability to serve on very national organizations and White House committees and such, and we're very proud of those individuals having the voice of USET at the table. I think that our staff here, it's grown so much, but just the fact that we do a lot more than other intertribal organizations do when it comes to healthcare, environment, transportation. I mean, we're still about those core governmental functions that need to be provided. And USET has been the ability for a lot of tribes that do not have the resources, or a lot of tribes that do not have the staff, or just the mechanisms in place. USET has been that organization over these last 50 years to provide that, and it's only grown.
So I see USET as providing two functions, and I think you're right. We provide a lot of governmental functions, but I think that USET is a thought leader, and I think that's kudos to you, and I think kudos to our structure for making that happen. And you are right. When you represent USET, you may be representing a regional organization, but it's having national impact, because people want to know what we think. They want to know what USET thinks, because that's the model that people usually go with. So when I sit on federal advisory committees, that's the question. And I know I'm supposed to be saying that I represent the Eastern region, but I always say I represent the USET region, because that's really how I identify. But I began with USET on the Health Committee in 1997, so now I've been around for a while. But my mom was on the board at the time. Yeah, so she was one of the delegates on the board. She was on our tribal council. And so it is a generational love for my family, let me just say. So I think that the founders should be very proud of where we've landed, because I think that we have shown the way to the rest of Indian country.
I think it's that same communal kind of commitment too, right?
Yeah.
You feel that at USET, you don't really feel anywhere else. I mean, coming here for this long, it's like always the same faces. Some of them go away, some don't.
Some come back.
And some come back. Yeah. You get booted away for a little while.
Talk about family. Chairman Barbary with the Tunica Biloxi was a dear friend of mine, and they have a gaming facility, and of course we didn't have one. And to get up here was a lot of money, and at times Chairman Barbary would fund some of us being able to come to USET, because we had nothing in the early days but just the federal dollars that we got. And so we've had some great leaders. Philip Martin was very instrumental in helping us get recognized. There's just been a lot of leaders. A lot of them are gone. But like I say, it's more like visiting family when we all get together. And we've got our hearts in the right place.
Yes, Auntie.
And the reality is, USET as a regional intertribal organization is the largest in terms of its geographic footprint, among other things. Yeah. But it does have the advantage of a very large geographic footprint. And within that space, there is a lot of diversity. Yeah. In fact, that diversity that you find within our geographic footprint is the very same diversity that you find at a macro level within Indian country. So everything you see, we see within our little region here within USET. I think that's part of that strength that we have is because we behave a family, because there's that level of commitment to one another, because there's that diversity, we are able to have those hard conversations. You guys had hard conversations earlier today, and we need to be in that position to be forward-thinking, to lead. And I think we have very visionary, very forward-thinking leaders across our board, across our membership, that position this organization very well. Last question, again, recognizing that why we are here this week. And it's a two-part question. So you all know that our motto is strength and unity, because there is strength in unity. And we know what that means in terms of our family of 27 tribal nations. So speak to me about what that means to you, but also what unity means for Indian country, not just within this region.
Well, I think, it means everything. Whether it's on a micro level in the state of Maine and we're fighting things with the 5 tribal communities, it's important that everybody is speaking with one voice. And how we get to that kind of one message is often painful, right? We have, I don't want to paint a picture that everything's always, perfect. I think
It never is.
What?
but we maybe at Port. But the thing I like about this organization is, when's the last time a tribe's walked away from our table and left? I mean, we've had disagreements like every organization, and we always get to a place when we're at the end of those conversations of compromise and a product that we can get a resolution in, because that's how we operate as the EOC, right? We operate at the direction of the board through our resolution process. And I think how we get there is often very indicative of how close-knit this organization is. So I think it's extremely important to be effective. And to the point of the last question, in terms of people listening to us and wanting our position and often formulate, I think of general welfare exclusion, for example, and other bills national in nature that we had a tremendous influence over, thanks to the help of our member tribes. And you see a lot of not just funding other tribes to come up to USET. I've seen other tribes take out money and pay dues for other tribes in the thing. I've seen tribes like Porch and Earl was a big one on Carcieri, and Mohegan to the Legal Defense Fund. I mean, on and on. So the unity of our organization is identified in many, many ways, and it makes us extremely productive. More nationally, I think that Indian country's unity is critical now more than ever. I think there's no more built-in excuse for Congress, for an agency, for anyone else, but to say, that tribe don't like it, that organization don't like it, so we can't do it, right?
I'll be quick. I think just because you've already stated it, we've all said it, there's strength in unity, and that's what this is about. It's us, we have taken what we survived off of, a social cohesive community, and this is all we had. Forts Creek, Gina, Choctaw, this is all they had. Well, now you've taken that model and you've brought it around this table. That social cohesive community of the leaders who have already experienced it, that know what it means to survive, and it's just gotten broader. And I think that's what we're about. Meaning, Kirk's right. We have our disagreements and things, but we always, when we go out with this is the agenda for us. We have those frank discussions, and I think that if people could model what we've done, or believe, that have the understanding of, hey, we're survivors, and we've got to get on message, and we've got to, the broader issues, we should be able to get on message. And I think that's where we need to go.
There's over 500 tribes, and I think Indian country all across the nation should try to unify, because we are in some dire straits right now with politics, Washington and everything, and they need to know that there's strength in unity. But I want to say that a lot of what we have done, our growth, our unity, new ideas, I thank you for those, because you have been responsible, you and your staff. You have wonderful staff. I mean, y'all do a great job. I mean, we're here, but you're doing out there what we want you to do across Indian country for Indian people.
You've taken all of my words, I think, but I would echo those
Yes.
things because to me, it's a partnership. It's a partnership with the tribal leaders with our staff, and not you wouldn't be able to do what you do without us sharing what our vision is, but also we wouldn't be able to do what we do without you doing the deep dive on the policy work and on the legislative work and on the advocacy as well. So to me, I think it goes back to why we survived, and that is because we left no one behind, right? And so we stand with one another because we know it's so important to stand with one another and not address the issues that are perhaps facing just one tribal nation, and to make sure that if we are going to challenge one another, that we use diplomacy. It's the same skills that our ancestors have always used, and they have passed it on to us.
Agreed.
Excellent.
So at the end of the day, as we've talked about today, we are survivors, and we have persevered against the greatest of odds. And while it's easy to get caught up in the challenges, there is so many tremendous, wonderful things happening in Indian country, and there's such a bright future ahead of us.
Yes.
But achieving that does require unity and working together. So it's just a great time to be together here in Washington, D.C., to be here celebrating or kicking off our 50-year anniversary. I do believe that we are moving ever closer to that vision of our founders. There's more work to be done, of course. There's more growth that could go on within this organization. But I do appreciate the time that you spent with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you for watching. For more information about how you can support USET and USET SPF, please go to usetinc.org and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Individuals that donate to USET and USET SPF ensure that we are able to continue sharing stories that inform and inspire audiences. Donations of any size help advance this essential advocacy work for Indian country.